In this tutorial, we'll be setting up Linux Mint in an Oracle VirtualBox on Windows 10 or 11 for Java development. The advantages of doing this is that it provides us with cross-platform compatibility and testing. It gives us standard deployment onto our Linux production service, and the virtual machine provides security, and it's also cost effective. So first we will install the VirtualBox. We will go to Downloads page and download the latest and run the installation executable. Then we will install the extension pack from the same Downloads page. And then we'll create a new Linux Mint virtual machine by downloading the ISO file from the Linux Mint website and installing it on the VirtualBox. So here we are on the Oracle VirtualBox downloads page. We see the latest version is 7.1.4. So we'll download the 64-bit Windows installer. Save it, open in folder, run it as administrator. Now we'll work through the wizard. We'll select all the defaults here. It will reset the network, so we'll select yes. Since we're focusing on Java development, we will ignore the Python warning for now and proceed with the installation. We'll start the Oracle VirtualBox after installation. And here is the Oracle VirtualBox started. So here we are on the Linux Mint downloads page, and it gives us a link for installation instruction. And it gives us an option of Cinnamon, XFE, and Mate edition. So we will select the Cinnamon one. Takes us to the next page and presents us with a bunch of mirrors where we can download it from. So we'll select one of the mirrors in the USA, save it. So it's downloaded. Now interesting to see that all my previous ISO images is still set up. So we'll take a look and see if the extension pack is installed. We'll go to Tools, Extension Pack Manager, and here it is showing that the extension pack is installed. So depending on your setup, you either need to install it or not. So now let's try and install a new machine. And we select the Linux Mint Cinnamon 64-bit ISO, and we'll say skip unattended installation. So we'll select next. We'll increase our base memory size to 4 gigs, and we will do 2 CPUs and select next. And we'll create a hard disk. 25 gig is probably too small for our development needs, so we'll up it to 50 gig. Select next and say finish, and then we'll select start. So here it started with that Linux Mint version, and because we do a manual installation, we're going to look at that. So it's manually starting up. And there we have it running, but now we actually have to manually install it, and we have this nice little old CD icon. It says install Linux Mint, so we'll select that. And now what is happening is Linux think we are installing it on a brand new PC, but it's actually an Oracle VirtualBox. So what it's seeing in fact is that big size virtual PC we've created for it. We'll select English and continue. Keyboard is English US. And we do want to be able to play multimedia. We'll install the codecs. And it says preparing Ubuntu drivers. And that's because Linux Mint is a flavor of Ubuntu. And we'll erase the disk and install Linux Mint because our VirtualBox disks have nothing installed. And then it's warning us. Basically, it's still thinking it's a PC, and it's telling us, yeah, you're going to wipe out your hard drive, which is fine for us because we're using a VirtualBox. Time zone is New York. Now here you need to grab pen and paper, because if you forget that password, you're going to have to reinstall the whole thing. And because we are using it as educational purposes, we will deliberately select a short password, and we will not encrypt anything. Select continue, copying files. You pass the copying file and at installing system. Now we're at configuring hardware. And now we've got the installation has finished, where we can continue testing or we can restart. That means we now effectively have Linux Mint installed in our virtual machine. So we'll restart. Press enter. Remember our password. And here is our welcome to Linux Mint window. Now we'll work through the welcome instructions. But first we'll go over to a full screen. Now we're in the full screen mode. Let's go. These are all the launches we can do. Let's see if we need any more drivers. No drivers needed. Update manager. Now let's see what we need to update. Whole bunch of updates. 115, and we'll use the local mirror. And we select install updates. Say OK. And now we're working through all these updates. It's now in the process of installing software. And we see a reboot is required. So we'll do a reboot. Restart. Remember our password. And we have updated our local Linux Mint in Oracle VirtualBox to the latest. And now we are ready to start preparing our Linux Mint environment for Java development, specifically for Java development using Windows, but deploying and running in a Linux environment. Now back to our slides, and we are getting ready to set up our Java development environment. So what we will do next, we will add the guest editions and the dual direction clipboard. The reason why, we get improved performance in graphics, mouse integration and more. And then we'll follow the instructions. Dual direction clipboard allows us to cut and paste between Windows and Linux running in the VirtualBox. Next, we'll set up a shared folder. This is a folder that is going to be shared between Windows and Linux so that we can store our code in our Linux repo there. We will also set up Java by installing Java 11 inside of Linux Mint, and we will set up GitHub in our Linux Mint so that we can share our repo in Windows. And we will enable network sharing for accessing Tomcat. We will use advanced port forwarding and add a new rule. Then we will install Tomcat 9 and start the service, check the IP address, and then we'll access Tomcat running in Linux Mint from a browser on our Windows machine. Now back to our VirtualBox, and we're ready to install the guest edition CD. We go to devices, insert guest edition CD image, and once again we see the little CD image. So we'll double click that and we'll open the auto run prompt. We'll select run. Remember our password. It opens the command line box. And it looks like it's installed. Now when we switch to full screen mode, we actually see the full screen. And now that we've installed the guest editions CD, we want to be able to cut and paste between our Linux Mint running in the virtual machine and our Windows machine. So we'll select Devices, Shared Clipboard, and we select bidirectional. And see, we also have a drag and drop capability, bidirectional. So first let's try and cut and paste from Windows to our Linux machine running in VirtualBox. So we will open a terminal, then we will go to Windows and we'll do a copy. And then in here we will do a paste. And we see that we were able to copy the text from our Windows machine Notepad++ to our command line terminal in Linux Mint. And now we'll try the reverse by opening up a text editor in Linux Mint. We'll put something in our text here. Select copy. We'll go to Windows, select paste, and we see we are able to copy and paste between the Nano text editor running in Linux Mint and the Notepad++ text editor running in Windows. And now that we've seen that we can cut and paste between documents in Windows and our Linux Mint running inside the virtual machine, let's look at the drag and drop functionality. We'll resize it and we'll drag one of our files here. And we see we essentially managed to drag it from our desktop in Windows and put it inside our desktop in Linux Mint. And now what we are going to look at is sharing a directory with our GitHub repository between Windows and Linux Mint running here in the VirtualBox. So we'll start by creating a directory in Windows. We'll go to our C drive, new folder, and we name our folder GitHub Linux Share, and we make sure that all the permissions are open so that it can be seen from the VirtualBox. We say OK. We have a GitHub Linux Share set up. Now we are going to our Linux Mint and we're going to Devices, Shared Folders, add a new shared folder, Other, GitHub Linux Share, and we set our mount point, which is where we will create the Linux directory. We call the directory GitHub Windows Share on Linux. We set auto mount and make permanent. Now we're going to veer off a bit from the official instructions, which says to use the guest editions upgrade from here, and we will do everything from our command line. So we'll open a terminal and we'll start by a sudo update. And we've done our update. And now we'll install the guest utils again from the command line. And it's already installed. Now we'll create our new shared directory. Here we see our created GitHub Windows Share. And now we'll reboot from the command line. Once we've rebooted, we'll go back to the command line. And now we'll mount our shared drive in Linux. This is what our sudo mount command looks like. We see we use the VirtualBox group. This is the name of the Windows drive to share, and this is the name of the Linux drive to share with the full path. And if we compare to devices, shared folders, you see that is the folder name mapped to the C GitHub Linux share, and we see the home Nico Designs GitHub Windows share. So what we'll do now is do a reboot. Back to the command line. And here we see the GitHub Windows share. And here we see we have a document that is shared between the C drive, the Linux share on the Windows machine, and the virtual machine running here in the Oracle VirtualBox. Here is our Notepad++ file share. Now that we have the shared folder set up, we are gonna set up our Java development in Linux Mint so that we can share it on our Windows box. So we'll start by looking at our Java version. And we see that it is not installed, but that we can install it. And we want to install Java 11. So we'll do a sudo update first. And now we will install the full OpenJDK 11. It asks for additional disk space and we say yes. As we can see, that was a big install. Now let's check our Java version again. And we see we have OpenJDK 11. And now we'll set up a GitHub directory in our shared folder. Now let's walk through the process of setting up our Git directory. So first we go to our shared directory. We do a git init, tells us our initial message. Then we do a config of our username and email. And then we have to do an SSH key generation. We accept all the defaults here for the file location, the passphrase. Then it generates this little image for us. And then when we look at our git config list, see the username and email has been set up. Looking at our user-generated SSH key, and now we have to copy this and add it to our GitHub account. We go to our matching GitHub account, and in our settings we go to SSH and GPG keys, and we add a new SSH key. So it's been added. There we go. We tested the connectivity to GitHub in our command line. Now that we've set up GitHub and confirmed that it works, we want to copy one of our existing repos from the GitHub site to our GitHub Windows share directory inside of Linux. We will go over to one of our existing repos. We will copy the entire URL and we do a git clone of the URL. And there is our entire Java module downloaded from the remote repo. So the next step is to see how it looks like in Windows, since it's a share. So when we go over to Windows and we select the shared folder that we've set up in the Oracle virtual machine. We also see that it's present here. We have the Git repo directory, and then we have the full module directory. That means as Java developers, we can do all of our development in the Windows environment with any of our favorite IDEs, and then we can compile it and test it in the Linux Mint VM. And now next, in case you noticed, our GitHub repository included Jakarta Enterprise Edition web modules. So what we'll need to do is have them running on a web server, and we're going to use Tomcat for that. We will create a new port forwarding rule for our virtual machine. We'll go to Machine, Settings, Network, Port Forwarding, and we set the host and guest port to 8080. We say OK, and now it's time to install Tomcat. We'll start with a sudo update, and we'll look at the available versions of Tomcat. And it looks like if we want a full edition, we will have to install Tomcat 10. So let's do that. It looks like it's installed. Now let's look at the system status of Tomcat. It does also look like it's up and running. So let's see if we can access it from within our VirtualBox. Go to the Firefox web browser and localhost 8080. We get a message here saying that it works, and we can install the documents, the example, and the administrator. Now we have to test if this also works from within Windows. So we'll go over to Windows, and we go to our Windows browser, and we plug in the same URL, and it works. So that means we can deploy our Java code inside of Linux to the Tomcat server, and then run and test it and access it from Windows for our web tests. And that concludes this tutorial. I will see you in the next one.